thank you for coming to this talk. There are plenty of other talks that you could attend, so I appreciate you coming here and appreciate you being a part of this conference. This conference is put on for you, and we love that you're here and that you're attending. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So I want to give us just a quick overview of where we're going, right? Give us a little roadmap. We're going to be doing a little bit of winding today. We're going to start with kind of setting the scene. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey and how that has affected me kind of learning as I've gone. We'll also look at the different ways that all of us in this room have learned and have been a part of, or rather how our journey has been shaped as we've become or are becoming software developers. We'll also look at maybe some ways that we can kind of tweak how we've thought about that in the past to make it more community-minded. And lastly, we'll look at some of the implications that has for us moving forward. So can everyone hear me? I don't think this thing's working. Can you hear me in the back? We're good? Okay, fantastic. All right, before we get started, I'm actually going to, I was thinking about this yesterday actually, how I wanted to kick this off. And I'm going to take off my speaker hat for a minute. I just want to, like we're sitting at a coffee shop having a conversation. I just want to communicate why this topic is so important to me, because on its surface, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that impactful. I'm going to, of course, make the case that it's very impactful and it has some very real implications for how we operate as software developers. But it's important to me for two reasons. One, I have no formal education in software development. I have depended on the resources in the community to help me get to where I'm at today. And so I want all of us to make sure that community is maintained and is available for as many people as possible. The second one is, I think, a little more personal. So my wife and I are actually having our first child in October. And we're really excited. We actually found out this week that it's a boy. And what's the interesting thing for that in our family is that generation so far has been all girls. So I've got 5 nieces, and this will be the first among the cousins that's a boy. But when I think about my son versus my nieces and what their experience is going to be like growing up, I have 3 of my nieces are mixed race. And so when I think about the experience my son is going to have versus the experience some of my nieces are going to have, my nieces just in general, and specifically the ones whose skin doesn't look like mine, I want their experiences and my son's experiences to be the same in this community. And I think this community still has a long way to go to make sure that everyone is treated equally, that we are bringing everyone in and we're making this industry accessible for everyone. And so to me, this is a step. It's not the only step, and it's not the only first step, but it's a first step in getting us toward that. So this is why this is so important to me, and I hope by the end of this that I can translate that importance to you as well. So let's go ahead and jump in. So a little bit about myself, and I'll kind of delve into my journey as a software developer in a second, but just kind of some stats. I'm a full stack JavaScript developer mostly, and I'm from Atlanta, live in the Atlanta area. I enjoy experimenting with all sorts of things, serverless architectures. I'm getting into Elixir lately, which has been really fun. And I also like doing this, teaching and equipping others in technology. This is something that I love doing, and I love being able to be a part of the community in this way. And then if anything I say today you want to connect with me, we can talk afterwards, but you can also connect with me on Twitter at Gesualdo. There's also my GitHub handle and my website, raygesualdo.com, so you can connect with me after this. I also have to, I'm really proud to work at SalesLoft. We're an Atlanta-based sales engagement platform company, and they do so much to allow us to come and speak at these events. They're actually a sponsor here for REFACTR, so I want to give them a big shout out. And it's always fun to brag that we're the #1 place to work in Atlanta 2 years running. There I serve as the staff UI engineer, and specifically I am on the front-end enablement team. So what that means is our team works on projects and educational documents and best practices and things of that nature to help other teams move faster. We also do things like providing some architectural direction for larger initiatives. So really excited to be on that team and to be a part of the SalesLoft family. All right, so before I get into exactly kind of what my journey has been, let me define community for a second, because I've kind of used that term and I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So when I say community, I'm talking about everyone who is in the software, who is a software developer, who's looking to become a software developer, who has been a software developer, right? We have a community made up of people, but that community also contains a lot of the output of those people, right? So we have things like blogs and videos and conferences and meetups, right? I consider that to be a part of the community as well. All of those in aggregate are the community. Now, again, I don't want us to lose the fact that those are all produced by people. But the community is also, I think we speak of the community in those terms many times, and we think of community output in those terms many times, but I also want to zero in, there are also a lot of smaller microcosms of community, right? Where when you're at your workplace, your team is a microcosm of the larger community. How you interact with your coworkers, how they interact with you, how you deal with conflict, how you handle pull requests, how you handle architecture, how you handle team meetings, right? That's a microcosm of the community and a community in and of itself. And then that can translate out to the broader community. So the community, quote unquote, is all of us and some of us and everything in between, right? So it can happen on a very personal level. It can happen in a larger space just like this. So when we're thinking of community, it spans so many different experiences. So my journey, I started working for a company in high school that built computer-based training. So if you've ever been hired at a company and the first thing to do is sit you down in front of a computer and you have to click through some screens, I might have built that if it was good. If it wasn't, then I'd like to say it wasn't me, but it might have been. And so that was my earliest kind of work experience. I spent 9 years there, and while I was there, the tools in that industry are very PowerPoint-like. They're all WYSIWYG. You kind of put things on a screen, and then it spits out JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. While I was there, I realized these things that I'm creating, I actually want to know how they tick. I want to know what makes them work. I want to know what happens under the hood. And so I started digging into community resources, different blogs. I think Codecademy was just kind of getting spun up, so I was on there quite a bit. And as I was going through that process, because we were such a small company, there was like 8 of us at the time. There were a lot of opportunities for me to kind of stick my nose in where it didn't belong and get some experience. So I started doing more work with PHP and starting to understand things like, oh, here's how a system works, right? Where there's some back-end code that creates something and makes something happen, and then it spits out HTML, and there's templates and there's themes and what have you, and moved from there more into kind of the WordPress space, as I think is common for many web developers. Some of you are still there, which is great as well. And I was at that job for 9 years, and from there I transitioned over to kind of the startup space. And I was fortunate enough to find a company that took a chance on me, having just basically kind of learned some of these things online without ever proving them out in a professional setting. And they were like, sure, we'll bring you on. I mean, they didn't pay me much, but they brought me on and gave me a chance. And from then, I haven't looked back. I've kept up with mostly front-end engineering. I do full stack work as well, but it's been a really enjoyable experience. But it all really started, for me, having some resources out there that I could go to kind of learn these things on my own. I didn't have anyone kind of directing me through that process. But even though I wasn't being directed through the process, I still had plenty of resources upon which to rely and to learn. So a little about my background and where I come from. Now, I said earlier, and what I want to delve into is not just where I come from, but kind of all of our educational background. So I mentioned earlier that we're expecting our first kid in October. I know somewhere down the road, my son's going to be old enough to be talking to me, and he's probably going to be incredibly curious. My wife and I are both very curious people, so he's probably going to be asking us questions constantly. And then that one question that every parent dreads, he's going to look to me one day and say, "Dad, where do software developers come from?" That's the question they ask, right? Yep. Okay, just making sure. So what I want to do is I actually want to have some audience participation for a second. All right, you guys ready? I know you just ate lunch. Thankfully, there were a lot of carbs, so hopefully we can get through this together, all right? So if you have a college degree in computer science or something related, or are currently getting one, can you raise your hand and keep it up? All right, so about a third of the room. You can look around, everyone else can look around, look at the hands that are raised. Okay. I'm not lying, it's about a third of the room. All right, you can go and put them down. How many of you attended or are attending some sort of in-person or online boot camp, directed training? It could have been something on Treehouse or even like Udemy courses, going through those. If you did that, raise your hand. Right. Probably about half the room. And again, everyone else can look around. It's okay. You can move your head. have a little motion. Thank you. All right, go ahead and button down. So that was about half the room, I'd say. And then how many of you would consider yourself self-taught or self-directed learners? Okay, good number. And again, you can look around. It's okay. All right, now, how many of you just woke up one day knowing software development? Put your hand down. Right? None of us, right? All of us, to some degree or another, have had some context wherein we've had to learn, we've had to get to where we're at today. Some of us are earlier in that process than others, and that's fine. We're all in different stages in that journey. And the point I want to make is that no one learns in a vacuum. No one woke up one day and said, I've got this software engineering thing figured out. We've all had a process that we've had to go through. And that process hasn't been completely on our own. Even if you're what I would call a self-directed learner, you've still had so many other resources that you've depended on. And that's everything from blog tutorials to videos, things like Egghead, IO, if you're familiar with that, conferences like this, meetups, even interacting if you've maybe had a mentorship experience with another individual, right? All of that is community resources. So to a certain degree, I'm going to assert that all of us are self-taught, because even those of you that raised your hand for a CS degree, those of you that raised your hand for boot camp, if I had $100, I would bet you the whole thing that you came out of those experiences without knowing everything you know today, right? Somewhere along the way, you got hired, and you had to do more than what you were capable of doing at the time. So what'd you do? Probably went and Googled it, found something on Stack Overflow, and just started going, right? So to a certain degree, even though we all kind of start from different places, we all, in the end, kind of end up in this self-taught place where we are responsible for our own continuing education. And for some of us, that's a really exciting thing. We like just digging into the latest, greatest technology and really internalizing it, and we move really fast. Other people, we like to kind of find our one niche and really kind of dig deep into that. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. But in the end, we're all self-taught. So again, if we think through all the different types of resources that are out there, we rely on I can't tell you how many times I've used Stack Overflow or Google just to figure things out. It's mind-boggling how much we have to rely on these resources, because the jobs that we're doing are not the easiest, and that's okay, right? We have these resources available to us. We should be relying on them. So everyone is self-taught to a certain degree. I'm also going to assert that what I just told you is completely false. None of us are actually self-taught, because none of us woke up one day and knew everything about software engineering. None of us sat at a whiteboard and out of nothing just came up with language design theory. None of us wrote our own language without having any sort of context beforehand, right? None of us are self-taught because we've all relied on those community resources. That informs our context, that informs our education, that informs where we've gotten to. And that's important to recognize. So none of us are actually self-taught. So what I want us to do for a second, and I'm actually going to stop talking for an extended amount of time and give you a moment to think about this. Think back in your journey as a software developer, right? These community resources hasn't just been, or our experience of not being self-taught but being informed by the community, that's not just resources, educational resources, that's also the people that we've come across, right? And if you've never had that one manager, that one coworker that's really kind of taking you to that next level, my hope is that you experience that soon. That's a very formative experience. But I want us to take a few minutes, not minutes, a few seconds. I won't drag it out too long. But I want us all to stop and reflect for a second and think back through our journeys of becoming a software developer, or in the process of becoming a software developer. Think of the people that helped you get where you are. Think of those resources that were instrumental in bringing you to where you're at today. All right, let's just remember those for a second. My hope is in that moment, lots of faces came into your mind. I hope in that moment, lots of resources came to your mind. And if it didn't, that's okay. My hope is, again, that you have some of those experiences soon. I also hope that if we could get everyone you've ever interacted with, that for someone, your face popped up in their head, that you've been that for someone else. And we're going to talk about that more as we go through. So I'm going to assert, and this is kind of in the title, so big spoiler, I mean, there's nothing surprising here. Community taught is a better model, right? And it's funny, I like to say words mean nothing and words mean everything. The fact that we say self-taught versus community taught, what does that really mean? Why does that make a difference? And I think it does make a difference. I think it recognizes that we have a context in which we've gotten to where we're at. It also recognizes the fact that we are in that community. We are not divorced from it. We are within it. So what does that mean? How do we interact with that community? How do we understand that community? And what responsibilities, if any, do we have to that community moving forward? So community taught is a better model. And what I want to kind of delve into now is talking about, if that's the case, how do we interact with this community? And actually, I'll back up for just one second. I want to stay here for just another minute. What is our responsibility to this community, and what can we do moving forward, right? So we're kind of getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of what we can do and how this applies kind of every day. Now, I want to give this caveat. The community is imperfect. Not everyone has had a great experience. The fact that we have phrases like underrepresented groups in tech means that there's still further that we need to go as a community. And so I just want to stop and recognize that for a second. Not everyone's experience is going to be the same. My experience is going to be very different than yours. It's going to be very different from the person sitting next to you. We may have some shared experiences, but each of us have interacted with the community differently. And so we have different perspectives on that community. So I don't want to have a pie in the sky attitude about it and just say, hey, the community is great. Let's all work to make it better. There are good aspects and there are some not so good aspects. And what I want us to do collectively as a group is to be moving it in a better direction. So let's talk about how we can do that. I'm going to use two kind of more businessy terms, but I want to strip all the business jargon away from them and actually just get back to their basic, right? So leverage. When we were in elementary school, we probably talked about simple machines, right? The pulley, the screw, the lever, right? And the idea of leverage is that given a lever, I can, given what I have, in this case, my strength, my physical strength, given what I can have a greater impact in moving something, right? So what I want to talk about is leverage, given what we as individuals have, and we'll talk about what we have in just a second. Given what we have, how do we leverage that to have a greater impact in the community, right? Because this community, it's a very interesting kind of symbiotic relationship. We are shaped by the community, and we shape the community, right? So it goes both ways. So regardless of how we've been shaped so far, we have a lot of say in how we can continue to shape it, right? So let's talk through some of those ways. Now, I said we all have something that we can leverage, right? What is that thing that we have? I'm going to use the term capital, right? A financial term, and I'm going to kind of, again, strip it down to its most simple definition. Capital is an asset you have that you can invest. So if we combine those two, right, what we're going to talk about over the next few minutes is assets you have that you can invest in the community to make a greater impact. You're going to leverage those to make a great impact. And I'm going to break them down into four categories. There are many more, all right? This is not an exhaustive list, but I think these are four where we can really get a good foothold and get started. And this can be a good launching point for further discussion. Another thing about these categories, I'm not going to give you like 10 steps to making your community better. This is not like boots on the ground, here's the 5 things. Everyone's context, and here's why. Everyone's context is very different, right? We work in different places, we interact with different people. The exact way that you may leverage your influence is going to be very different than mine and very different than your neighbors. And so this isn't going to be a how-to because each of us is going to have to a certain degree, figure that out in our context. But if we have some basis for how to discuss it, I think we can have better conversations about those kind of implementations, okay? So let's talk about it. I'm going to talk about 4 different types of capital, all right? And the first one is what I'm going to call privilege capital. And I might be preaching to the choir a little bit because, at a conference like REFACTR, but let's be honest. There are different levels of privilege, different levels of access in the software development community. Some of us have a lot, some of us don't. And I am always of the opinion, regardless of the type of asset, but specifically around privilege capital, the more you have, the more incumbent it is upon you to use it to help others, right? I actually ran across, preparing for this talk, I ran across a great article. It's actually a talk that the gentleman had put down into print called "How to Lend Privilege." I can't remember the speaker's name, but that's the idea that we're going for here. That we can, for those of us that may have privilege in the community, and privilege again is across many different types of intersectionalities, right? Privilege shows itself in many different ways. And the funny thing about privilege is when you have it, you don't really know you have it. So it is incumbent upon us to constantly be self-reflecting and trying to think through what privilege do I have and how can I use that for someone else? And again, the more that you have, it is my personal belief that it is then incumbent upon you. You are responsible to use that well for others. So privilege capital is the first. The second one is what I'm going to call relational capital. And relational capital is the relationships that you have with others, right? The relationships that you have with others, you can leverage. And when I say leverage in regards to people, I don't mean use. I'm not talking about using people. I'm talking about having relationships with others that benefits the rest of the community, right? Maybe that's making a warm introduction between someone who's looking for a job and someone who needs a developer, right? One of the other speakers here, Scott Hansman, wrote a blog post just a little while ago that was great. I highly recommend it. It's called The Transitive Property of Friendship and the Importance of the Warm Intro. And I'll let you read it, but one of the things that he says in there that I think is really powerful is he kind of has this idea of the transitive law of friendship, which basically means, and I'll use two of my teammates as an example, if I trust Adriana and I trust Pete and they both trust me, it's a lot easier for them to trust each other, right? The trust that I have with them reciprocally kind of gets transferred or translated whenever I introduce them, and then they can form their relationship, right? It's a lot easier, and we see this all the time, even down to the level of a friend that you trust that you know has similar tastes as you recommends a restaurant. Hey, I went here; it was really good, right? I mean, that's a trivial example, but that's relational capital, right? They have mutual trust there. And you can trust their opinion, and they say, hey, go here, I think you really like it. You trust them, like, great, I'll go ahead and try that out the next time I'm in that area of town. Right? Again, a trivial example, but I think that illustrates the point well. That transitive property, when you can transfer trust from one person to another, that's a very powerful thing. And so if we have those relationships, we should be using them for the benefit of the rest of the community. And again, that doesn't mean we wear ourselves out and we run ourselves ragged and that we completely burn out, right? There is such a thing as self-care, as limits, but we should be leveraging these things to some degree. Knowledge capital. Some of you in this room are just plain smarter than the rest of us. You are, and you've got a ton of knowledge internalized and I don't say locked up in your head as if you're not willing to share, but you just know a whole lot. And that is an amazing asset that you have that you can share with others. Now, whether that's shared with blog posts or videos or just on your team, right? You being a resource to help those around you, right? It can manifest itself in many different ways. But knowledge, being well-versed in your field, is an asset, and it's one that you can use to help those around you. And lastly, financial capital. Some of us have more money than others. Also, some of us have companies that have more money than others, right? And we have enough influence in those companies to help make decisions around perhaps supporting open source projects or buying support contracts from open source producers that really maintain the long-term viability of those projects, right? So it could be personal, it could be a part of the organization that you're with. And this doesn't just mean you have cash on hand, right? In the personal sense. This might mean you have the financial ability to do more work or to work less during the day You don't need a second job to make ends meet, so you can do more open source work, or you can write those blogs, or you can be a part of documenting open source libraries, right? So financial capital doesn't mean you've got cash on hand. It means that you have some level of financial means that allow you to do other things to help people. Sometimes that will mean, just cash. Other times that might mean you are freed up to do other things, right? But again, all of those should be leveraged for others. So these are 4 categories. Again, this is not exhaustive. And I also want to be very cognizant of the fact that not everyone has all of these or some of these in the same measure. We all have a different set, right? A different mix. Some of us may have multiple, right? And the example of someone having the financial means to write lots of content in the community, you might be leveraging multiple types of capital there, knowledge capital and financial capital, right? So these can kind of get mixed and matched along the way. But the important thing to note here is we have somewhat of a framework for understanding the different types of capital, and that we're leveraging it well for the rest of the community. So it all really boils down to this, and this is, if you walk away with nothing else from today, I want you to walk away with this. Recognizing that we are all community taught, right? None of us are self-taught, even though we own our own education and it doesn't absolve us from personal responsibility of continuing that. We have relied on the community and the resources and the people within that community to help bring us along, and hopefully we are contributing back to that to some degree. So because we are community taught, we do have a responsibility. And the responsibility, I would say, is directly related to the amount of capital you have to give back, right? So if you have a lot of insert type of capital here, please, please, please leverage that for the better of the community. My hope is that in 18, 19, 20 years, when my son and my nieces, if they decide to go into this industry, if they enter this industry, they have the exact same level of access, they have the exact same level of privilege, they have the exact same ability to move upward, to support them and their families if they choose to have some. That is my hope, that over time, the disparities that are in the community right now will disappear. And I think all of us have a part to play in that. Again, we are shaped by the community and we shape the community. So let's go and make the community a better place for the next person, right? We can make it a good place for us, but let's really think about leveraging the assets that we have to make it better for the next person that comes along. Thank you so much.